Hello, everyone, and welcome to our At the Table interviews. And this is a series of interviews where I, Rick Grantham, will be interviewing our various deal execs, reviewing the deals that we've concluded during 2025. First up is John Powell, who was the deal executive on the sale of a software business called Best SAP. And yeah, John, maybe give us a bit of background. Tell us a bit about Best, and they're known as Best, and how they came to us and how the deal went.
Great. Thanks, Rick, and good morning to all the listeners and the viewers. Yes, so this was a software business. If we were to classify them, I'd say they were a software developer. In their specific instance, they were a niche developer inside the SAP space. They developed their own intellectual property modules that they built that were applicable and used within the SAP ecosystem ERM finance vertical. So it was a really great bolt-on module that they offered to SAP users. And it was specifically focused at identifying and assisting and simplifying with accounting reconciliation functions, which obviously within the context of bigger businesses, this was really useful, as we call it, or as the software space likes to talk and refer. It was seen as a mission critical product or products. And within that space, they had a really focused, robust business that addressed these specific aspects.
And when we were approached by Henry a while back, beginning of last year, I seem to recall that they had someone at the table, something was happening. Maybe talk a little bit to why they came to Deal Leaders and why they didn't just go and conclude the deal on their own.
Yes, it was very interesting. When they got to us, they had been in discussions, informal discussions, and they had actually already received a verbal commitment or a verbal offer. So when they got to us, they had been speaking to this specific, it was a private equity fund that they'd been talking to. And when we obviously got to them, they basically said to us that this has been in motion for some time. They don't know what the business is worth. They've gotten this informal offer, and they just don't know where to start. They need guidance. They don't know, is it a good offer? Is it a bad offer? They've been speaking to various parties and friends, and you know how it is with business owners. You're always, trying to get various inputs as to what's going on, and especially when offers on the table, there's a lot of talks around the campfire and the bright places about, is it a good, is it a bad, and so forth. So, when they got to us, this was the context. We then obviously said to them, look, you need to approach this whole process a lot more formally than an informal discussion that they had been doing. And effectively, we brought them into the process. We started our whole sales process, valued the business. We ended up seeing that there was a significant difference between what they had been verbally committed as opposed to what the business ultimately sold for. And interestingly, we did include that specific fund in the process, and they ended up withdrawing their offer. They never put forth a formal offer, and there was a significant difference, like I said. So it's very interesting how these things develop when you're on formal processes versus these informal discussions, because a lot of potential clients or ultimately existing clients, a lot of these deals originate from informal discussions, which sometimes business owners will pursue that, but more often than not, we've seen that when you run a formal process, it really does produce significantly better results. In this instance, that was a prime example of that.
And we did the foundation phase for them and did a valuation exercise for them. How did that valuation exercise compare, firstly, to what they'd been offered and to what ultimately came out through the process?
Yes, thanks, Rick. It was a big difference, significant difference. The ultimate offer was about double than what the initial offer, informal offer, was put forth when they got to us. The great thing about that foundation phase tool is that we calibrate it with multiple valuation methodologies. So it's not a single methodology that we use. It calibrates against market trends, industry adjustments, company adjustments. There's a whole bunch of things that it takes into account that really gives good insights as to what the differences are. And this tool helps us to extrapolate what we see versus what is out there in the market. And I think without that, it would be quite tough to get to a valuation range that is deemed reasonable. But we put a lot of effort and thoroughness into that process. And yes, there was just a significant difference in this instance that came about. So thankfully, we did do it, and we were able to gauge what we think was reasonable. And the market also showed that when our offers came forth, the groupings were in our range. Our eventual buyer was on the high end of that. And we actually had a good reference point as to what we thought was reasonable, and the market substantiated that.
Now, I think probably one of the most amazing things about this process that we ran was how much international interest we got. Maybe talk us through some of those meetings. I remember I was in some of those. You were in all of them. A lot. Where in the world did the interest come from? And what were the key issues, questions? Yeah, tell us about the interest from the market.
Yes, sure. It was very interesting. We got 6 offers on that specific business. 5 of them were international, 1 was local. We saw a lot of interest come from the North American market. So that obviously includes the US, Canada. Canada, for interest's sake, has got a big interest in South African software businesses. We had a number of meetings with Canadian software groups. Some of them, we actually had 2 or 3, I think, put forth offers. But apart from that, there were also a number of discussions from the Canadian region. We also got offers from Europe. There was one German company that was a great fit. They put forth a good offer. We also had from Dubai. There was interest from Dubai. Internationally speaking, there was a lot of interest spread across the world in the major software hubs, if you will, and they showed interest in this business. And it was interesting facilitating all of these meetings because every one of these internationals there's a similar common theme that arises from these meetings and what they all view as important. Things like ARR, things like customer churn, things like concentration risk, or where geographically speaking the business has its customer bases and where those groupings arise. But apart from those common themes, these international acquirers all have their own little twists and little specific niches that they like to position and bring into their decision-making process. So it was really interesting seeing all of this come to light through these international meetings that we facilitated. And there were hundreds of them. I think we went to 129 different buyers across the world, spread across 21 different regions. It was a very thorough process, which gave us a lot of good insights. Yeah.
And how did that, when the offers finally came, what is the value of those meetings in helping Henry make a decision, the shareholders make a decision?
I think absolutely imperative. I think without those meetings, it would have been impossible for him to make any sort of concrete decision. We use these meetings for multiple purposes. It's not just a meet and greet and you see what each other's faces look like. That's not the point of these meetings. These meetings are to really, push in, ask the tough questions, things that we know, for example, our clients, if there are specific issues that they're concerned about, what's going to happen to my employees? What's going to happen to the business? Are you going to retain legacy that I've built, or are you going to consume it into a corporate culture and do away with what we've put in place over years and years? These are hard questions. These are tough questions that business owners really lie at night awake about, and they think about these things. So these meetings, apart from the formalities and meeting and greeting, we use these meetings to address issues like this as well, to ensure that these tough questions are asked directly and to give them the opportunity to really test those synergies that they see, that we see, that the acquirers see, and we drill into them. We use it as a canvas, basically, just to cover all of it, to ensure that there aren't any questions unanswered and that you can really just dig into the detail of those things. Because if you don't ask those questions, they end up surfacing in due diligence or in legals. And then right at the end of a process, this whole thing could fall flat. So we very thorough, very direct in those series of meetings. And I think it was great. I'd love to get Henry's feedback as opposed to ours, but from what it looked like, I really think it would have been very difficult for him to make a proper decision, especially when you've got so much interest. It's different when you have 1 or 2 offers around the table, but when you've got 6 around the table, you really need to make sure that you get to the right questions because that's a lot of options to work through. I think it was really impactful in finding that.
I think certainly in what I recall in his case, and because he got offers from around the world, he was able to make decisions because, I think in the end he took the best offer, but also the best offer happened to be in the same time zone as South Africa, rather than having to go, because it's quite tough being acquired by a US firm and suddenly having to start your day at 2 p.m. and finish it at 10 p.m. So I think the time zone was fortunate for him. But yes, I think that exposure to so many acquirers. Sure, he got offers from 6, but he probably had 12 or 15 meetings with international buyers. And I think that really makes that final decision making a whole lot easier. Any closing comments on how that worked out and where the business is today? He's 6 months in. Any feedback from the acquirer, from Henry himself?
Yes, I guess it's just part of my curious nature, but I've actually spoken to Henry. I've spoken to his financial director a couple of times since we closed the transaction. I'm really curious as to how it's going and how they've enjoyed or how it's all transpired. And they were full of compliments. They said that for them, it didn't feel like much has changed in many ways, except for the fact that all of a sudden now they've got this enormous access to the resources that the acquirer offers, which they really enjoy. And they really felt that it's great that they could just continue the business and now use that additional focus and resources. From that perspective, it's been great. We're obviously really pleased always when we hear that there's good feedback and good synergies that play out post-transaction. And also we received an email from the buyer a couple of weeks back that also just was full of compliments. They said, thank you very much for this great deal. They're enjoying the relationship. They're really working well together. There's a similar working culture between South Africa and their region in the UK. And all of this just really was positive to hear. It was good to see that all of this came out. So our preparation wasn't in vain.
Yeah.
But yes,
I think
it was great to get the good feedback.
Also heard how that acquirer, for anyone who happens to be watching this video and knows about, is in the software game, is very keen on more South African acquisitions. Yeah, I think we've introduced them to South Africa as a target region. In fact, I think they're even opening an office in Cape Town at the moment to move some of the administration part of the world. So yeah, we've really opened their eyes, and Henry's business has been a great ambassador for the country, I think, in terms of profiling us as a good destination to own a business in. I think I'm going to call it there, John. And congrats on a fantastic deal. I think it really was a kind of perfect story with insights at every single stage. And if anyone wants to know more, please give me a call or give John a call, and I'm sure we can share a lot more. But thanks very much.